Our guest today is Alejandro Cisne. Alex Cisne's passion for martial arts began in 1991, and he has accumulated black belts in 5 different martial arts, including Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Tempo Karate, Judo, Traditional Kung Fu, and Sanda. Alex made the USAWKF national team 11 times, won the Pan American Games 4 times, and is a 2 times bronze medalist at the World Wushu Games. He is an accomplished professional MMA fighter and a former WGC welterweight champion, and is also a successful UFC cornerman and trainer. In addition, he is a currently certified International Wushu Federation Wushu Sanda judge and is a coach for the U.S. national Sanda team and currently coaches out of Houston, Texas. Hey, Alex, how you doing?
Good, Matt. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. So, is everything? Have you guys reopened? Is everything?
Yeah, we opened up about 4 weeks ago. We've had a slower amount of clientele coming back to train, but we've been open for a little less than a month.
Oh, okay. All right. Sounds good. So I wanted to give people a little bit of background about you and try to talk about your history, and then we'll kind of go into like where you're headed into the future as the interview goes along. Is that all right?
That's great. Let's do it.
All right. So how did you first hear about Sanda and find a coach?
At the gym I was training at the time, we had some of the higher level students, and the coaches, my then Sifu, talked about it. They brought it up and mentioned it, and I was intrigued. So I watched some fights. I was hooked. That was it. At that point.
What part of watching it like kind of drew you into it in particular?
I thought it was a different rule structure than what I had been exposed to at the time. I'd watched a lot of Thai boxing matches, a lot of professional kickboxing matches. I just thought it was really interesting to see people throw each other in addition to the punches and kicks. It was a little different than what I had seen before, and I thought it was fantastic to watch. It was very fun to watch to me.
That's cool. So how would you compare Sanda, training in Sanda compared to other forms of combat sports like Thai kickboxing or BJJ or something like that?
Well, kickboxing, obviously the throws are the biggest difference. Kick catching is a huge part of the sport. If you can't do that in kickboxing, who cares? If you can't do that in Sanda, you have a really big problem. You're in a lot of trouble.
Right.
If you can't wrestle, to save your life in kickboxing, again, who cares? But for Sanda, again, kind of a big deal. You kind of need to know those things. For BJJ, the two sports realistically are night and day. They really don't have a whole lot in common realistically. Even for the physical conditioning portion, even if I'm just lifting weights in the gym, things are different. Plyometric training is a huge part of Sanda, and it's not as much for BJJ, whereas a lot of the static strength that I need for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to finish chokes and arm locks just doesn't carry over the same way for Sanda.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Of course, they're quite different. But what do you feel? What's your view on like cross-disciplinary training? Like training in, is there advantages to training in both of them, or also other types of wrestling, shuai jiao, or boxing, or that sort of thing?
Yeah, I think if you're going to compete in Sanda, you kind of have to in the United States. There, outside of certain spots that are very specific to having high-level Sanda gyms, you're going to have a hard time finding really good Sanda training partners at a certain level. So in order to push yourself, you kind of have to cross-train. I do a lot of wrestling. I do a lot of takedown training, even just to train for Sanda. And then even then, at certain levels, I have a hard time finding high-level training partners for me to work with. So usually I have to dip into the Muay Thai community and train with some of those guys.
Right.
So cross-training in the United States as an athlete for the United States is a must. You kind of have to.
Are there any the disciplines that you prefer more than others as far as finding training partners, or?
For the takedown training, wrestling tends to be what works best for me. I've done a lot of judo as well, but the gi changes quite a lot. So the wrestling is a little bit more practical for Sanda, in particular Greco-Roman. And then as far as the striking is concerned, Muay Thai, as long as you talk to the athletes you're training with them, hey man, I can't work elbows or knees very much, if we could skip them basically. And a lot of them will be amicable to doing that.
Okay. All right. And then, of course, you've mentioned the different levels between the national and international training for Sanda. And can you kind of explain that to people a little bit? Because I know that you've been to China and you trained and you even competed there before. What's in a nutshell? What's the difference between the two?
Night and day. I mean, They're very different levels. At the national championships, we are behind as far as the country in terms of the United States with regards to high-level Sanda athletes. At the national championships, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I run over everything in sight. I do very well at the national levels, and at the international levels, it's much different. It's much harder once we go overseas. So the Chinese, obviously, they've invented the sport. They've been doing it much longer. It's a much bigger deal there. So they have a lot more funding, a lot more sponsorships, a lot more high-level training partners, like I was mentioning earlier, to work with. Whereas here, I really do have to go to Lubbock or certain other places that have good training partners for me to work with.
Right.
So the levels are just, totally different. Totally different.
What can you tell people about what was your first experience when you went to China? Like, what was your first time?
My first World Championships was in 2007 in Beijing. This was just before the Olympics. And the participation rate was pretty high because we were anticipating the possibility that we'd be an Olympic sport. And some of the Sanda athletes did go as a guest sport in specific weight classes. So there was probably more competitors in Beijing than a lot of the other World Championships I've been to. And again, that's just anticipation. Everybody wants to go to the Olympics, So that was kind of a big deal. And at the World Championships, it was my first, and it was kind of a culture shock because, again, here at the United States level, I do very well. But when I got to the international level, it's like everybody here is national champion from wherever they're from. And certain countries are further along in the sport than others. China and Iran are far ahead of the United States. They're far ahead of most of the other countries as a reality. So it becomes who's more experienced and who's more exposed to the sport from where they're from.
By comparison, so that was your first experience, and then just most recently you were in Shanghai just in October. How do you feel the sport has progressed since then, both domestically and international?
The skill sets constantly improve, constantly. From when I was in Beijing in 2007 till the last World Championships I was at in Shanghai, the skill level jumped quite a bit. You have the refinement of the techniques. You'll see certain athletes will start seeing what works well for them, and they'll refine those things to mastery levels, that you wouldn't see at earlier time periods. It's like looking at the progression for mixed martial arts. If you watch Royce Gracie win the first couple of UFCs and you watch the UFC champions of today, it doesn't even look like the same sport. It doesn't look like those guys would belong in the same playing field. And although I wouldn't say the contrast was that stark in Sanda, it's there. There's definitively a difference. The athletes of today are further along than the athletes of yesteryear.
And then what is there anything that you think that not just US but other countries that are still developing their Sanda programs, is there anything in particular that you would recommend or that you see that they should be doing to try to catch up or do what they can to close the gap?
Man, there is the old adage, if you can't beat them, join them, I went and trained with the Chinese national team for a little while, primarily because I knew they were really good at the sport, obviously, right? So it exposed me to certain types of training methods that we just don't see here in the United States. I think martial arts realistically is a journey. Everywhere you go, everything you do, you will learn from it, right? So I think being exposed to those high-level teams like that was very eye-opening for me, and I learned quite a lot.
One of the things that's obviously a key difference is, like you mentioned Iran and you mentioned China, those are professional state programs. And obviously, the United States is not. Many of the Pan American Wushu Federation, they don't have that luxury. That means that you as athletes have to overcome difficulties that the Chinese athletes do not. And so as far as like funding, finding time to train, finding time to work and finding that balance. I was wondering if you could kind of give some examples of difficulties that you encountered as you trained and how you overcame them. And then also what drove you to do that? Does that make sense? Because in China, this is their job. Why do you train? And it's to work. But for people in Pan American Federation or USAWKF, you do it because why? Why do you?
Yeah, for the Chinese team, for the Iranian team, everything is paid for too, right? They have all of their things sponsored to them from their government. I had to pay to go to the World Championships. I had to pay for my housing there, my food there, the time away from work. So there's a financial burden with it too, in addition to just finding training partners and places to train for this level of a sport. So outside of just the training itself, there are financial matters that come into play. But from a training perspective, I think you asked me why. The game, really. I just love the sport so much. I wanted to keep doing it. And even at 40, I went back and had more, I had already medaled at the World Championships before, so the goal was obviously to get the gold medal. I wanted to be the world champion. And I knew things were not in my favor at 40 years old versus, younger, more physical athletes. And then in addition, the training you mentioned before, it is difficult to come by high-level training partners for that particular sport here in the U.S. We just don't have as much of it. It's not as widespread, right? So the cross-training does become kind of a must. If I can't train with let's say Coach Ian Lee in Lubbock and some of his athletes there, Bruce Wang, Livingston McKenzie, Corey Johnson, and if I don't have Max Chen helping me out from New York, what do I do? And we all live in different areas, right? Although the previous athletes I mentioned, we all live in Texas, we're 9 hours away from each other in a car. So it's not something we can do on a regular basis. Right. So the biggest difficulty really was finding high-level training partners to work with for me. And I think the training itself becomes difficult because of that.
So are there things that you can work on by yourself, or does everything is it all just come down to sparring and have partner training?
Yeah, well, there are certain things you can do by yourself, right? Obviously, I can hit a heavy bag, I can jog, I can do some of the physical training, like lifting weights, that sort of thing. The strength and conditioning, I don't need training partners for. Realistically, we have very good strength and conditioning programs here in the United States that you can take advantage of, right? Just find the right people and get to work. But for skill set training, yeah, you have to have skilled training partners to practice the skills themselves. And that does become the most difficult part of the training.
I see. And so is there anything you feel like that the Chinese or the Iranians or the Russians, or is there anything about their programs that they do that we can kind of duplicate here, or or I know that in Iran, for example, they have training camps where they bring their athletes together and train for X number of weeks for to prepare. Does like for the United States, do you feel like are there enough athletes to do that,
I think the athletes we have, right? We do have capable national champions at some of the major weight classes that. We do have enough athletes that I think we could do something like that. The problem becomes survival, right? If I have to pay bills, it's hard to go to a training camp for, let's say, 2 months to prepare for the World Championships. Right. So some of the burden does become a financial thing, and that it's not an insurmountable thing. That's something that we could find ways to conquer, but it's difficult. It's hard to find that.
And then also, as far as like expanding the sport, like getting other people interested in it, what do you think the best ways are to do that?
Man, you got me there. I'll be honest, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the best way to market the sport is.
Well, you teach Sanda in Houston, right?
Of course, I do a lot. I do indeed. A lot of my athletes, the thing is, I'll have high-level athletes. I have an athlete named Paris Moran. He fought at the Junior Olympics in Sanda. He's won nationals several times also. He's won the Pan American Games. He's fought at the World Championships. But it's hard to keep him going in the sport when he can make money doing, let's say, mixed martial arts, even if he's less enthusiastic about it than Sanda. I love Sanda. For me, it was a big part of my life. It always has been and probably always will be. But for high-level athletes that want to keep training, you go back to that financial burden. If they want to find a way to survive and keep doing it, they have limited choices. And one of them is going into MMA, and the other is probably teaching.
Do you feel like Sanda and MMA is how close is the training between the two?
You know, there's obviously quite a bit of similarities, right? The striking for Sanda is, man, ultra useful for MMA. I mean, look at the current women's 115 champ, Weili. She was a Sanda athlete. Look at Zabit. I think he fights at 135. He was the Russian Sanda athlete, you know. I think Muslim Salikov, one of the athletes I competed against at the World Championships, he fights for the UFC now. So for a lot of the striking side of things and just the takedown prevention, it's highly advantageous to have. Highly advantageous. I think you'll see more of that too. As some of these Chinese athletes and some of the Iranian athletes that eventually are forced to retire from the Sanda world, they already have a good chunk of the skill set necessary to do well in MMA. So you may see more of them in the coming future.
So you see that as kind of the natural progression of like a Sanda athlete, like say even on a Chinese or Iranian scale, those people who retire from Sanda would be suited to move into MMA?
I think they can, you know. They have a good chunk of the experience necessary just from the years of doing Sanda, right? We're used to having people punch and kick at us. We're used to having people try to take us down. So those things are not foreign to those types of athletes. Kung Lee was one of the first generation American athletes. What did he end up doing? He left Sanda and went into MMA. So it's a common occurrence in all sincerity.
But what about, well, just because the rule set seems so different, like with Sanda, you don't get to work on your extended grappling skills that are required in MMA.
It ends up being a way for the athlete to keep being an athlete. Does that make sense? It's like, for example, the high-level wrestlers that we see in the UFC. Once college is over and they can't wrestle in college anymore, and if they're not slated to be in the Olympics, what do they do with that particular skill set? Well, they learn how to punch and kick. They learn how to throw a knee. They learn how to do some submissions on the mat, and poof, you got an MMA fighter, right? Take John Jones, for example, high-level wrestler from the get-go. Then he started training in MMA, and then now he's probably one of the most dominant champions of all time. You know, so he already had a piece of the puzzle completed. All he had to do was learn certain other skill sets that he didn't have before, and obviously get to a certain skill level with those things. But he's already an athlete. He's already used to long hours of physical training, so he's got a leg up. He has a huge advantage. So I think a lot of the athletes you see in the UFC that do well are from other sports. You know, they Hoist, for example, jiu-jitsu champion, became an MMA champion. Matt Hughes, for example, was a wrestling champion, became an MMA champion. You know, the list goes on. A lot of the athletes do that.
Right.
Sorry to interrupt. Alex, can you speak up a little bit? You sound a little low.
Oh, we're going to get ultra close up to my computer so that the mic picks everything up.
All right. Okay. We'll just get a better view of Alex.
All right. Get my nose hairs in there. We good?
Terrific. All right. Sounds good. Cindy, is the sound better like this?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you.
Okay, cool. All right, cool.
Over from the mic. Sorry.
No worries. And then, so let's talk a little bit about, you know, as far as you mentioned the problems for raising the profile of Sanda in the U.S. and that it is difficult. Do you feel there's, particularly for Americans interested in other combat sports, I would say, would there be anything in particular that we could kind of leverage from Sanda to try to encourage people from other disciplines to try Sanda?
You know, I think what set off Kung Lee's career, for example, he started fighting in other kickboxing events, and they would have specific matches where he was doing Sanda and he was launching some of these other athletes. He'd take them down. I think there's a way to do that for other sports, right? For example, One FC has a lot of different types of events that they sponsor. They'll have Sanda athletes fight in there. They'll have Muay Thai athletes, and then they'll also have MMA fights. I think just broadening the horizons for some of the other athletes or some of the other sports and some of the other events would go a long way. I think if you could talk to some of the bigger mixed martial arts companies and have them say, hey, can we do this type of a fight in your event? I think that would help quite a bit. Just more exposure to the population is really the biggest key.
That's it's one of the reasons why we set up these type of seminars. Like Bruce and Corey are teaching like fundamental Sanda. They taught earlier today. But one of the things that we as the federation have recognized is that the Sanda really is really located in only a very few areas of the country, and the rest of the country, like as we hold these types of seminars, we get questions emailed in. Hi, I want to learn Sanda. Where I live in LA. Where do I train? Difficult. Or it's outside of just a handful of places from Texas. Really, actually, outside of Texas, there's Baltimore and the East Coast, and I can't even think of is anyone training on the West Coast right now in Sanda?
Mike Lee and Brandon Chu, they were former U.S. team members. They have gyms out there. I mean, I don't know what their programs are like or anything like that, but they're people that have been in the sport and do understand it. Then in New York, Max Chen medaled at the World Championships twice also. He also double bronzed. He's someone very knowledgeable. He's crazy though, by the way. If you do go train with Max Chen, be aware of that. I love that guy. He's crazy.
All right. Well, you can't argue with the results though. So that's
that's true. That's true.
So, but I'm also just trying to try to think of like what else do you feel like is it possible to bridge the gap between the two sides of Wushu, between I know some people like Matthew Lee, for example, really like to try to move from Taolu to Sanda or Sanda to Taolu, because at least for the United States, there's many more Wushu Taolu schools than there are Wushu Sanda schools, probably like 10 times as many at least.
Easily.
But do you feel there's any way to bridge the two? Is there anywhere where the two skill sets could meet?
The athleticism, in all sincerity, is not too dissimilar from one to the other, right? The emphasis is different, right? It's martial art, but you either focus more on the art or you focus more on the martial, right? So realistically, the athleticism, though, is actually fairly similar. And you're learning the same kicking techniques if you're doing Wushu or if you're doing Sanda. Now, the level of refinement may be a little different because of how often we have to fire a roundhouse versus, let's say, somebody doing spear that has to fire a roundhouse. It's not as often, right? But the basics are the basics, and the athleticism is still required for both. So, yeah, I definitely think athletes can do both. Now, are you going to be forced to specialize at a particular point? Probably, especially if you want to get to the World Championship level and do well. Right.
Well, I've actually talked to Coach Lee about this as well, as far as like what we can do domestically.
Matt, have you ever seen Coach Lee do a form? Have you seen how much he form? Dude, he could have tried out for the team and made it. That guy can move. Okay, and he's my Sanda coach. Coach Lee's outstanding for Sanda, right? That guy can move. Is a reality. So he's kind of a point specific. Yes, you can do both. Definitely.
Yeah. Right.
Believe it or not, I have some moves too. You may not believe it, but next time we're at an event, I'll do some Taolu for you. Better watch out.
All right. Sounds good. Sounds good. Definitely.
Will I make the team? But do I still have the moves? Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. But I also wanted to talk about one other thing as far as between Taolu and Sanda. I mean, you mentioned, of course, you'd have to specialize at some point, but for Taolu people in general, there's an overwhelming interest in Sanda. Because you spin around a spear or you throw enough punches and kicks at air, at some point you'd like to hit something, and that's Sanda's specialty.
I can relate.
Right. So we were just trying to find a bridge as far as what we could do with that, but especially is in your background as an athlete and as a coach, what would you say, because we also have the Taolu parents who will also be concerned about safety, contact, concussion protocol, like things like since in Taolu there's zero chance of getting someone else hitting you. I mean, barring a freak accident or an elephant running over the competition floor, you're not going to make any contact. But how do you feel as far as the safety for people who want to train for switch from or try Sanda from Taolu background?
Yeah, I've been to gyms that they have that school of hard knocks mentality where they try to blast each other in the head as hard as possible in sparring matches. I just think that's not necessary. I think you can learn a lot more by doing some basic training and not hitting as heavy. If I hurt my training partner, well, who am I going to train with next time? I've already kind of expressed how important having good training partners is, but let's say I'm training with one of the better training partners and one of us gets hurt. What do we do now? In all sincerity, really high level, good training doesn't have to be ultra brutal at all times. Do you have to hard spar? At a certain point, yes. That way you don't panic when someone's coming at you for real. But most of the training does not need to be concussion level punches being thrown. A lot of it can be relatively light contact, and you can learn quite a lot like that.
Okay, that's good to know. I mean, I think that's like the biggest concern that I've heard from Taolu parents or even Taolu athletes.
Nobody wants to get hurt. I understand that. Right.
So, and then what, as far as, it feels like there's more Sanda champions or Sanda athletes going into MMA, and they're doing well there. Do you feel like, is that something that you can market as train Sanda as a path to specifically as a path to MMA, or is it a little too different?
I think if the sport gets bigger, absolutely. You hear a lot about the type of training that some of these athletes do to go into MMA, right? And Muay Thai tends to be one of the top martial arts for that. I don't see why Sanda athletes couldn't do this exact same thing realistically. But the sport would have to grow is the key for that, right? You'd have to get more recognition for the sport before you could get the recognition from the other sport. Does that make sense? We'd have to build Sanda before you could really advertise it as a way to get into MMA.
I see. But as far as the skill sets, like you mentioned, like John Jones comes from wrestling or others come from Muay Thai background. But Sanda, coming from a Sanda background doesn't put you at any sort of disadvantage compared to the transitions from wrestling.
I think, I guess Kung Lee did fantastic with it, right? He did just fine when he went to MMA. He didn't have any major problems. You see other athletes that are a little bit more current. Wei Lei's the champion for women's 115 for a reason. She's outstanding. Her last fight was amazing. It was a great fight. And she's the current champion for her weight class. Zabit at 135, I think he's in the top 10 for his weight class, and he's pretty outstanding also. So there's athletes that have been able to make it happen already.
Actually, let me ask you another question about that, because I think also even in Sanda, you can see that the Chinese and Sanda tends to do really well, especially at the lower weight classes. But what about at the higher? What about at up in the heavyweight and the bigger guys where China doesn't have the advantage?
Pat Barry was another UFC fighter once upon a time that did fight in Sanda. I think he silvered at the Worlds. So he did even better than I did, is a reality. And he did just fine in the UFC, So even at heavyweight, there are some, Pat Barry's the one I can think of off the top of my head, but I don't doubt there's probably a few more. And so even heavyweights do just fine,
Right. Okay. Well, we have a work cut out for us as far as figuring out how to popularize popularize Sanda and make it bigger. So let's focus more on that for just a little bit.
Okay.
As far as for Sanda in the U.S., what would need to happen? Like kind of like what do you feel will be the first steps to raise awareness?
I guess marketing would probably be the first step for me. I look at martial arts like Krav Maga that just have fantastic marketing. You know, realistically, as a martial art, I don't want to bash on it, but I mean, the Israeli military will probably shoot you. So utilizing them as your advertisement tool doesn't seem logical for me. But, you know, I think their marketing is outstanding. Does that make sense? I think if you can get a better marketing game plan, basically, I think that could go a long way.
All right. And then, but how do you market it right now for your own school? Do people, since obviously people aren't coming in saying, hi, I want to learn Sanda.
Now, our school is also a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school, so it's marketed as an MMA school, right? Sanda happens to be the striking style I teach my athletes, right? But at the same time, we are marketed more as an MMA gym or as a Jiu-Jitsu gym than we are as a Sanda gym. Sanda is there, obviously, because I'm there, but the reality becomes the mechanism for striking training to get into MMA for a lot of these other athletes. For marketing as Sanda, the problem is a lot of these guys haven't heard of, they don't know what that is, you know? So I say Sanda and they get confused, like, what's that? You know, having changed the name doesn't help either. We used to call Sanda Sanshu, you know? So when we changed the name to Sanda, when I assume it was because of the unification under Mandarin, that didn't help either. So sometimes I'll say Sanshu and people are like, oh, yeah, like Kung Lee. It's like, yes, sure, yeah, that's it. But they don't know what Sanda is, you know? So changing it really didn't help, in all sincerity. Right. It became it was counterproductive.
Right. Marketing-wise, we definitely take it a couple steps back, especially both of them are like, weird Chinese names that don't roll off the tongue in English.
Yeah, I mean, I think either of them sounds fine in English, but you don't, unless you're trained to, or unless you know what they are, you don't link the two together. You know, you think of it as a separate thing.
Right. And then when you did train in, when you did go, like, say, from 2007 to 2015, or whenever you do go to China, or whenever you did train abroad, did you find that was there anything from their training programs that you found that could be taken back to here? Or
absolutely, and I did. Some of the drills I did in China, I still do to this day with some of my athletes. So a lot of the training protocols that they utilize, I brought them here and I use them with my own guys. So of course, yes, they're at a higher level in the sport. So, I mean, you got to emulate the champion, be a champion to some extent. So
just in general, could you, if we're going to emulate champions, something else that's interesting that happened is, you know, in Shanghai was that Iranians sent 8 people over and came back with 8 gold medals.
Yeah, outstanding at the sport.
What do you think is the secret of their success? Like, obviously they're not Chinese. They don't, you know, they don't have all Chinese coaches or anything like that.
Right. A lot of them are former wrestlers. A lot of their teammate members are former, they were in the Olympic program for their wrestling program, just didn't make that top spot. So a lot of them became Sanda athletes. Now, a lot of the Iranians, I mean, they're fantastic athletes. They're very creative in terms of their approach to martial arts. So they do things obviously a little different than the Chinese. But another thing that they do that's different than the Chinese is they do not retire their athletes as quickly. Right, so you'll have a dominant champion that's a dominant champion for a decade-long period. Or let's say a Chinese athlete wins the World Championships. You probably won't see that guy again. You know, not because he couldn't do it, but because he usually moves on. Does that make sense? I don't know if that's a cultural thing, just the way they support the athletes in China, the way they're treated versus the Iranians. I have no idea. I've never trained with the Iranians. But usually, by and large, when I see a Chinese athlete win the Sanda World Championships, I don't see them again. The Iranians, I've seen some of those same Iranians since 2007. The current coach I fought against in Canada in 2009, and he and I have become good friends. But you keep seeing those same athletes over and over, so the experience level of those athletes becomes very hard to overcome. Mm-hmm. They're multiple-time world champions. Mohsen, they're a 170 kilogram champion. That guy's been champion for maybe the last 10 years. I have no idea. I see him all the time, all the time. Whether it's at the Sanda Cup or the World Cup or at the World Championships, he's there, and usually he dominates. He just got such an experience level. He's going to be hard to overcome. And a lot of their top-tier athletes are that way. They're women that have been the women's champions. I think they're sisters, and they're going to be really tough for anyone to beat because they're just so experienced. Right.
That brings us back to back to in the U.S. There is no way to gain that experience. That and I mean, other than team trials, Pan American Wushu Championships, and World Championships, what other events are possible to test your skills?
Great question. Yeah, I think therein lies the cross training. Therein lies maybe we should just put on a few more events. Could talk to USAWKF. Hey man, you're big in that organization, man. You can talk to some people, get some more events. That's all.
Well, yeah, it's something that it's especially with Coach Lee. That's something that we're trying to see what we can do. Because even in IWF, they are researching different ways to improve the overall visibility and popularity of Sanda. And I mean, what you're saying is there's not a big secret that we have a marketing problem, we have a visibility problem, we have a publicity problem as far as the promotion of Sanda in particular. And the way to do that is to expose it more, to get into. Yeah, so they're aware of the problem, and they're seeing what we can do, but it's going to be baby steps.
Yeah, we made Sanshu big in the 90s, right?
Right.
And then it fell off. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's really weird because in Chinese it's not that big of a deal. Like the word changing just meant you just went from from hand to strike, open unbound hand to unbound strike. So they don't. I think particularly for native Chinese speakers, they don't see the difference. Why are you guys freaking out about it? But
that's the thing. You're speaking to people that don't speak the language and don't know the difference between the two.
Right. I tried to explain it to them that it's the exact same as far as the differences, like people, telling them seeing Wushu and like Mushu pork, it's like, it's quite different if you change it a little bit,
More language to them. They have no idea what you're talking about.
Right. So, but for, as far as looking at other ways that we can develop Sanda for the United States, are there any other countries that you think we can model after? I mean, China's it's not apples to apples because we don't have a state-sponsored program. We don't have the funding of the central government. But are there because you have so much international experience, are there other programs that we should consider emulating or studying?
Here on our own side of the world, the Brazilians actually are coming a long way in Sanda. I think their team as a team is a little stronger than ours as a reality, right? We'll have some of our athletes beat some of their athletes, but definitely they have some of their athletes beat some of ours. So I think their team is a little bit stronger in that respect. Their high-level athletes have more exposure to the sport. So I think the Brazilians would be somebody we should possibly take a look at their model too and see what they're doing different than us.
And then I saw that
Marcus, the head of the Brazilian team, he's done a fantastic job. He really has.
Right. Yeah, definitely their team has been developing really, really fast and really well.
I really like that guy too. With the judge certification course, man, that guy could get down like that. That guy can move. He's got That's
He surprised you?
Yeah, Marcus can move just fine. He's got great technique.
Cool. And then what did you think about some of the other countries? Like I think, was it Turkey that also did well in Shanghai? Or are there other non-Asian countries to consider?
Yes. There are other countries that do well in Sanda. Sometimes the French do relatively well. Sometimes the Italians do relatively well. Now, for them, their teams can be hit or miss, much like our own, right? They'll have some athletes that do really well, and then a lot of times those athletes will move on too. So there are other countries that do have solid athletes that we could emulate. I think the Georgia as in the country, did really well too.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's a medal in the last couple of World Championships that I've been at, the one in Russia, and then of course the one that just happened in Shanghai. They did relatively well also. So maybe take a look at what some of these other countries are doing to help promote the sport and emulate that. We'd have to call them up.
Right.
Hey, what you guys doing? What's your secret? Yeah, don't be that guy. Don't be stingy with it. Share the knowledge.
Cough it up. Yeah.
Got it.
So what? And then as far as like so if we're talking about developing Sanda athletes, is there anything within American athletes or just athletes in general, like that would be prerequisites? Like like in Taolu, for example, in China, they practice a certain amount of eugenics, where they watch a kid and they can measure his foot and say, oh, you have a shorter leg, you have a really strong fast twitch muscle in the before you're connecting your hip and your quad, so you can kick extremely fast, and because once the leg is short, it's going to go up really fast. It will be good at Taolu. Are there things that you would look similar things you could look for or develop or particularly train for finding future American athletes?
Well, body types will be a thing with regards to martial arts, right? The tall athlete's not going to fight the same way as the shorter athlete, but the strategies can change quite a bit. The tall, long athlete can outscore on the punching and kicking side of things, whereas the shorter athlete can dominate on takedowns. So for Sanda, whether you are tall or whether you are not, you're shorter or somewhere in between, it's not as big of a deal because there are ways to win, right? There are champions that are taller. There are champions that are shorter. They just find a way to make it work for them. Now, as far as quick twitch muscles and muscular training for the athletes, I think that's pretty far down the line for us. First, we got to have more athletes to start, finding those common traits with, right?
Right.
I know that I've trained with the last Chinese national team, and I don't know that they had a single defining characteristic. The athletes were all of all stripes. They were all shapes and sizes. And some of that's some of that's weight class, sure, right? They're 85 kilo guys, not going to be the same size as their, let's say, 50 kilo guy or 52 kilo guy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But so I don't know that we have that same kind of a thread from an athlete perspective. Maybe you could look at that from a weight class perspective, but for the sport itself, I'm not sure. That's beyond my knowledge for the time being.
Well, actually, yeah, it's kind of good you went that way, because we have this other challenge that I know that you probably face too, but I know that Bruce has and Paris had too, is in a certain way is like, what do you do as we develop the Sanda and we develop these athletes, but they're all alone in their, when they're in the United States in their weight category? Like, you can't, you have like, if you're in 75 kilogram and your training partner is a 56, there's a really only limited amount of
certain things you can
value
do.
There is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So is there, do you find that that going into the finding people who do Muay Thai or wrestling or something else, would that be is that enough to count to, like if you get that type of training partner, is that enough to prepare for like World Championship?
It's the best we have. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Would I prefer another high-level 80-kilogram Sanda athlete for myself to train with? Of course. course.
Mm-hmm.
But if I don't have that available to me on a regular basis, I have to do with what I've got, you know?
Right.
If I can't train with, let's say, Livingston McKenzie, who's our 85 kilo athlete, or Bruce Wang, who's our 75 kilo athlete, it's not as useful for me to train with somebody a weight class higher than that or a weight class lower than that, because now we're talking about 20 pounds. You know, that's
right.
a lot of weight at high levels of skill. For me to train with Livingston, who's 85 kilos, where I fight at 80, it's 10 pounds difference, right? It's not ideal, but it's acceptable. It's fine. I'll do it, you know? And Bruce, same concept, just lighter. But like you said, for me to train with Paris, who's my own student, there's only certain things that I can do with Paris, right? I'm a lot larger than he is. I'm a good larger than he is. He fights at 65 or 60. So you're talking about a considerable amount of weight difference. So I have to be careful when I train with Paris. I'm much heavier, and he's my student. I don't want to hurt him, obviously, you know?
Right, of course.
Hey, believe it or not, I don't want him to hurt me. That kid's tough. The kid's tough.
Yeah, for sure. We're actually hoping to have him to interview him, I think, in July.
Cool.
So we're got about 9 minutes left. But as far as for you, do you pandemic aside, do you see growth potential in your area for promoting Sanda?
Yes, I do, and a lot of that's because I have my own athletes that will help me. Does that make sense? I have athletes of my own, like Paris. I have another athlete that's competed at the Pan American Games and Nationals, Gabby Echeverry.
Oh, right.
I have a few high-level athletes for Sanda that I could utilize to help me spread the word, right? So I think I would have an easier time of it than someone in, I don't know, let's say Oklahoma, where, well, I take that back because Livingston's there, but let's say a state that doesn't have a higher level Sanda athlete to teach other Sanda athletes. Does that make sense? So I would have an easier time with it than someone in, I don't know, South Dakota. We'll use
right. Yeah.
To my knowledge, we don't have any high level Sanda athletes there, but right.
I don't think so. I don't know if there's any Wushu there.
I'm gonna blow up my phone, getting mad at me.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it'll be a shock to me too. I mean, maybe tomorrow Facebook will be flooded with all these South Dakotan Sanda athletes. Are what the hell?
I get a lot of hate mail. It's okay. I don't check Facebook. Joke's on you.
All right. Yeah. No, but your point's taken. Yeah. You can't improve in something if there's no one there to teach it.
Right.
But with that said, let's spin it over there for a little bit. So we can't teach Sanda without Sanda instructors. You know what I mean? So is it possible do you feel it's possible to switch different teach instructors how to do Sanda if they're not coming from a Sanda background themselves?
Yeah, I think you could definitely cross-train athletes from other sports, right?
Oh, but I meant cross-train the instructor. You know what I mean? So a Muay Thai coach.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Could you teach a Muay Thai athlete how to do some catches and basic throws and how to avoid takedowns? Of course. Yeah, I think you can, absolutely. We've had athletes on the team that were good at Muay Thai athletes that ended up doing just fine in Sanda to some extent, right? So yes, it's definitely possible. Yeah. The Iranians, like I mentioned before, a lot of their athletes were former wrestling athletes that learned how to strike and got very good at it.
Right. Because the only the challenge is even with Brazil and Iran and the other countries we talked about, all of them kind of have a sudden disadvantage because Brazil, their federal government does provide support. They don't cover it 100%,
okay.
But like China or Iran, but they do. There is some funding, which is better than the situation we're currently in. But I'm just wondering, do you think, would it be advantageous to look into something like just if we're just want to try to find training partners, to find other countries, some say like more of our neighbor countries like Canada, Mexico, Central America, South America, other Pan American federations, and just bring them together to train. Just.
Yeah, I think that'd be outstanding. Yeah, there are athletes from Mexico and Brazil that I know for sure. I haven't seen the Canadian team very often, but I don't think I've seen them since the World Championships were in Canada. Not their soccer anyway, but from Mexico and Brazil, certainly. Yeah, they have some athletes that we could utilize for training purposes that'd be great. Yeah.
Well, just saying,
Since we have a few minutes left, I would like to show some picture if you guys are okay with it.
What are the pictures of?
And
what pictures? Yeah, Cindy.
What kind of pictures do you have up your sleeve there, Cindy?
Let's see.
If they're of me, do I look good? Is my first question. Second question, am I fully clothed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so
nothing right there.
Alex doing Taolu. So here you go. We have proof.
With the cigar in hand.
yeah, the cigar counts as an extra apparatus.
Yeah, look at that horse.
We have this is from the World Championship. Alex won the bronze medal.
Yeah, I think it's Malaysia. I recognize that.
Yeah. And then we have a couple of practice photos from the practice section.
Yeah, that was in Shanghai. My buddy Bruce.
Yep.
Man, looking at all these pictures makes me realize how fat I've got from COVID.
And this is the USA team, the Sanda team.
Some good-looking guys up there. Especially that guy in the middle, the red shirt.
And this is also the Sanda team with our USAWKF president and officers.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the entire thing doing Taolu. Here you go.
You're doing some more Taolu. What you guys know in Taolu, you guys better watch it. I'm coming for you.
That is Alex winning the game. I don't know if this is the second one.
This was my second fight, yeah.
And yeah, that was the greatest. It's really just a TKO, hands down. Okay, I think that's all of my photos. Bring back some memories.
Sounds good. Were there, Cindy? I didn't check. Were there any questions while we still have like 2 minutes?
No, I don't think we have any question from the audience.
Yes, you do. Matthew Lee. Matthew says you had very good in and out movement with your kicks, particularly the speed of your side kick. Are there any drills you recommend to train this type of movement?
For side kick? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a couple of different exercises where we'll hit the hip flexor movements, just bringing the heel from pointing downward to pointing to the direction you'd fire the kick in. That's one of the exercises I utilize for training my side kick. I do some of the rubber band training as well, just firing out the kick, just getting the muscle memory in there. And then there's a drill with the heavy bag where one athlete will pull and hold back the bag, then they'll release and you have to time your side kick to stop the motion of the bag without moving yourself. That one's been pretty instrumental for me also.
For the bands, which do you just use the heaviest band you can find, or is there a particular?
For me, I use the black one. I don't know if that.
It's the heaviest one.
I'm sure it has a weight attached. A weight.
It does. Yeah. The black is the heaviest.
Yeah, I don't know what. I don't know what the weight is though for it.
All right, Cindy. Were there any other questions?
No, there's no question. But we have a message from Vincent Mann, your fellow teammate. And he said you are arguably one of the most successful athletes in the sport of Sanda.
Oh, well, thanks, Vincent. Appreciate it.
Into the coaching role, time for the next generation to fill his big shoes. Challenge accepted, he said.
He's just being nice to me because he stayed at my house once.
That's the reason.
No, Vincent may be the future of the sport in all sincerity. He's a talented athlete in his own right. A lot younger than me. Got a lot more time to do way better than I did. So we'll leave that on a note. To date, I may be one of the better Sanda athletes, but Vincent, keep it up, man. You can pass me up, dude. No reason not to. You got plenty of time. You're young.
Well, sounds good. All right. I think, are we out of time, Cindy?
Yes, we are at 55 right now, so it's time.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Alex. It was great to talk to you, and thanks for sharing all your knowledge.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Cindy.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Cindy.